on behalf of African Integration Forum, we welcome you to this discussion, this conversation, Restoring Faith in Democracy, Reimagining North America's Policy with Uganda. On the panel, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. We have Helen Epstein. Helen is an author, co-author, translator, and editor of 10 books of narrative nonfiction, including The Memoirs, Children of the Holocaust and Where She Came From, A Daughter's Search for Her Mother's History. She became a journalist at the age of 20, while caught in a Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. She was the...
Wait, can I interrupt a bit?
Yeah, please.
You actually have me confused. Don't worry about it at all. Yeah, I'm confused with another writer with exactly the same name. I actually have not written about the Holocaust.
Oh, okay. Because that's what was sent.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. But I write mainly about Africa and about public. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Person, and if we were the same person, we would be amazing. Actually,
that would be good. We also have Jeffrey Smith is executive director who, for a decade of experience in human rights, advocacy, pro-democracy, and research on Africa, including Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Freedom House, National Endowment for Democracy, Institute for Democratic Alternatives in South Africa. Mr. Smith has planned and conducted human rights and civil society assessment missions to several African countries and published extensively on US Africa policy and human rights issues. You're welcome, Mr. Jeffrey.
Thanks for having me, appreciate it. And I know there's a lot of Jeffrey Smiths out there, but you got me and my bio perfectly correct, so well done.
That was good. At least I could, I'm proud of that.
There's a lot of us.
Mr. Moses Walugembe is a journalist living in Massachusetts with over 10 years experience in television broadcasting and reporting. He has worked as a news producer for Vision Group television department before joining Next Media, NBS TV, a partnering TV station for Voice of America and BBC. Moses has covered 3 Ugandan elections and most recently has also covered the 2016 USA elections. You're welcome, Mr. Moses.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and to be a part of this panel. I also worked for UBC. That was my very first introduction to TV before I joined the Vision Group.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Yves Engler, I don't know if I did justice to your name. That's a thumbs up. So he's an author based in Montreal, Canada. He has written more than 10 books on Canadian foreign policy, including Canada in Africa, 300 Years of Aid and Exploitation. Yves is a fellow of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. You're welcome, Yves.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And we're also blessed to have Salwa Mukoda. Salwa is a lawyer, activist currently working with AGS Tax Group in Newton, Massachusetts. And originally from Uganda, Sarah moved to the USA and a couple of years ago. And she holds a master's degree in law in banking and financial law from Boston University. She's also an advocate of the High Court of Uganda and has worked with prominent law firms as well in Uganda. You're welcome, Salwa.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I hadn't hidden my microphone.
All right, thank you. So for our attendees, for our viewers, would like to say thank you. You can go on the different Facebook pages where it's live on JB Muwonge, on AITV, and a couple of other pages that are streaming this live. We thank you. And also there's an option for you to be able to send in questions. So feel free to write your questions. We'll get to them at the time when we have our Q&A. I'll start with Mr. Jeffrey Smith, since your name has been really out there the last couple of days. American foreign policy. What's your what are your 2 cents on our theme for today?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It's really an honor to be here with all of you today. Thanks for organizing this. I think it's a real testament to the power of the diaspora. I think it's often an untapped resource and movements in Africa and elsewhere, pro-democracy movements for human rights. So I really appreciate this opportunity. Specifically in terms of U.S. policy towards Africa and Uganda specifically, I think we're sitting at a really unique time given the recent change in power we've had here in the United States and our own dalliance with authoritarian leadership. I can't speak on behalf of Helen, but me as an American, the past several years have been incredibly difficult and challenging, and we've experienced many of the experiences that our Ugandan brothers and sisters have experienced living under authoritarian rule. But with the changeover of power and the new Biden administration coming in, I think it presents us a unique opportunity to make some fundamental changes. The problem, of course, is the fact that U.S. policy towards Uganda specifically has been flawed for many decades under both Democratic and Republican administrations. However, there are some glimmers of hope. Even before the January 14 election, you saw some of President Biden's top advisors speaking out on the situation in Uganda, namely the troubling incidents of pre-election violence, the crackdown on the opposition, on civil society, some of the more draconian laws that have been put in place. Namely, these were coming from Jake Sullivan, who is going to be President Biden's national security advisor, so a very significant figure in the administration. But also, there are several individuals who will comprise top levels of the government who have in the past been very critical of the Museveni dictatorship, namely Samantha Power, who will be heading the United States Agency for International Development, which sends hundreds of billions of dollars annually to Uganda for various development projects. But then also Linda Thomas Greenfield, who is going to be President Biden's ambassador at the United Nations. And she was a former Assistant Secretary of State for Africa who has been vocally critical of the Museveni regime in the past. So I think we do, as opposed to the past 4 years under the Trump regime, we do have some officials in very high levels of power that are certainly informed about what's going on in Uganda. We've been meeting with them and talking with them for a number of years now, including when we've hosted Honorable Chagulani here in Washington on several occasions. So those relationships have been built over a number of years. We believe we have their ear and we believe they are listening. However, there's still obviously a very big uphill climb to make. Changing policy towards Uganda from a U.S. perspective is going to be very difficult, but not impossible. And I think now more than ever, we're sitting here at perhaps the most opportune time we've had in a generation, to be honest. I can certainly go into more details on that and talk more about that as we move forward, but certainly want to give time to the others with us today to hear from them. So thanks again for having me, and looking forward to speaking with all of you today.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for that. And I will go straight to Mr. Moses Walgembe. Moses Walgembe, as a former journalist, as a person who has covered Uganda for a long time, and now living in the United States, what's your view on the American policy on Uganda?
Thank you very much for having me here. I don't know whether I can hint on elections, but probably we can look at that later. But because that's it gives us a better understanding of basically where we are and the elections in particular in Uganda, of course, vis-a-vis the foreign policy of countries, including America and then Europe, to say the least. But in general, I think Museveni, President Yoweri Museveni, and his government that came into power in 1986, of course, promising a fundamental change, has received, I think, is one of the regimes in Uganda. I think, particularly him only, has received over hundreds of billions of US dollars in development funds, in assistance, including aid, including the classified reports that we don't know, that go to the military. That is, of course, the military aid, which finds itself in general in having him to form up his personal secret military forces, such as the Special Forces Command. The foreign policy of countries like USA, Israel, talk about European countries, or recently I've been hearing about the Democratic Governance Fund, which has been suspended. You see that all that has been the foreign policy of these countries helping Uganda, helping it in the name of hope that probably at some moment there would be democracy realized. You know, there would be self-determination of Mother Uganda. But in the end, you realize that most of those resources have ended up into Museveni creating a military dictatorship, which is right now the biggest problem that the country is facing. It is basically the biggest problem. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that there has been some of the aid used on, probably they will tell you that there are roads constructed, I hear kilometers here to here, which is on the list, because remember in the first, at the onset, I told you it is the government that has received the most, like billions of dollars in aid. So the foreign policy of other countries, such as America and Europe, towards Uganda has been that of help, that of aid to Uganda, particularly focusing on democracy building, because in the end, it is through democracy that Ugandans can be able to realize their potential. Uganda as a country, it's a beautiful country, I must say. It has a lot of potential. We are talking about a country which has the biggest, youngest population in the world. Over 80% of the population right there is below 35, you know, or probably below 40, which means that it presents a big advantage. You know, countries like US, we have many people who are, you know, over 60. The life expectancy in this country is high. So, I mean, and at that age, people cannot think as, you know, 18-year-old or 30-year-old, you know, the energy is still too much. So Uganda has a potential of coming up with industries and then provide for cheap labor even, you know. But all these things have been deterred by the president's vision, which is practically, when you get deeper into it, as we shall discuss later in this discussion, is basically for him to build a dictatorship that he intentionally wants to have so that he can get hold of the resources and then probably, I don't know, I think he'd lead the country to some kind of a position that he wants.
Thank you very much, Moses, for that very deep analysis from yourself as a journalist. I would like to jump and go. The beauty about social media, we're going to go live to Montreal, Canada. So, Yves, what's your take on the policy of America to Uganda, Africa, and Uganda in particular?
Well, yes. I think that everyone else on the call is probably more knowledgeable about the subject than myself. But as someone who focuses on Canadian foreign policy, which obviously overlaps with US foreign policy, I can say very clearly that the Canadian and US governments do not care about democracy. They're not motivated, their policies are not motivated about democracy, be that in Uganda, be that elsewhere on the continent, be that in Haiti, Honduras, Venezuela. And I think that it's absolutely essential for people who want to see democracy in Uganda who want to see Museveni go, who want a more just society, to understand that. That doesn't mean that democracy and movements pushing for democracy don't impact Canadian and US policy. They do. The populations in Canada and in the US do believe, generally speaking, in democracy, and do want or like to believe or want to believe that their government is promoting democracy and human rights elsewhere. But that is not the core of what drives Canadian and US policy in Uganda and elsewhere. What drives it is usually a mix of geostrategic calculations and corporate interests, right? And making profits for Canadian, US, other countries' corporations. So I think that that's important for anyone who's in the U.S. or in Canada, who's part of the Ugandan diaspora, who wants to see the change. You have to, first of all, it's very important to be engaged and to push the Canadian U.S. government to actually uphold their stated ideals. They generally talk about democracy and human rights, even when that's not usually what's driving things. But it's important to press that matter. How I see it is that Museveni is somebody who has been a military ally of Washington, has been involved in Somalia, Sudan, Congo. He's served U.S. and Canadian geostrategic interests there, corporate interests there. Canada has this long, decades-long sort of low-level military relationship. They use Entebbe as a place for Canadian military planes. That goes back to Rwanda in the early '90s. That continues until today. And if you look at the Canadian government's position on recent developments, I mean, killing 50 people in central, downtown Kampala, that's not small. I mean, that's a really, that's a very big deal in the lead up to an election to kill that many people in such a prominent way. I mean, that to me suggests there's a lot more killing going on that we're not hearing about in more areas where the regime is more able to get away with it, less high profile. And the Canadian government's statement on that is very, very minimal, right? It's very minimal. There's some criticism, but it's not criticism of any serious sort. And if you compare it to Venezuela, or you compare it to some other places where the Canadian government wants to get rid of the government, their criticism is infinitely stronger, even if the human rights violations that took place in Kampala are far worse than anything being accused of other governments. So I think that's important. I also think just a little bit of history is important, right? I mean, Canada passively accepted the Idi Amin's coup against Milton Obote in '71. They agreed to it. They actually referred to the Canadian official at the time, referred to the coup and Idi Amin as a quote, "The new administration favors democracy and Western civilization's democracy, while the former one favored the communists." So that's their reference to Idi Amin after the coup in '71. They didn't like the fact that Milton Obote had nationalized Falconbridge, a Canadian mining company, their Kalembe mine. Bata Shoes, a Canadian company, was the biggest shoemaker in Uganda at that time. Both of those companies began during the colonial administration. There were Canadians that were part of the British colonial administration in Uganda. There were Canadians that go back that were, surveying land as part of the British colonial process at the early 1900s. There were Canadian missionaries that operated in Uganda that enabled British the consolidation of British power in Uganda. So there's a history of colonialism that Canada has contributed to in Uganda, and my broad reading of Canada's role in Africa not just in Uganda, is that colonial, there's never a clear break from the, formal colonialism ended, but there was a imperial process that began very soon after. And if you look at Canadian policy across the continent today, the main objective is the profits of Canadian mining corporations. There's billions and billions of dollars of Canadian mining companies across the continent, and Canadian government does a whole lot of effort to facilitate those profits being brought to Canada. So I guess my main message would be for those in Ugandan diaspora in the U.S. and Canada, mobilize. If you want to see democracy in Uganda, mobilize, get active, and hold the Canadian and U.S. government to their rhetoric, right? They say they believe in democracy. Let's force them to actually take democracy seriously. Thanks. I think we may have lost our moderator.
Moses, looks like you're gonna have to step in and moderate for us.
Okay, as Ismail comes in later, probably it looks like we lost him. But thank you very much, Yves, for that historical background about Canadian foreign policy. Obviously, you hit a point right there about the criticism of, for instance, the regime, which is, for me, is a key point. But before we get into that, I think the world of Ugandans are home. Many people want to hear from Helen Epstein. Helen, please come in there. What's your take on the foreign policies of the first world countries as we went to school knowing in relation to Uganda?
Thank you so much, and to all of you on this panel and all of you elsewhere listening in. It's very nice to be here. Thanks so much, and this is such an important question. I thought I'd just reminisce a little bit from my own kind of personal experience. I used to be an aid worker. And in 1993, I went out to Uganda to work on an AIDS program, kind of early days in the epidemic. And I remember being driven around one day in a project vehicle and seeing a ring of soldiers in the center of Kampala around what's now called Constitutional Square. And it turns out the soldiers were blocking a pro-democracy demonstration back then. And the donors knew exactly what was going on. And in meetings with journalists a bit after that, the US ambassador at the time said, he said, Museveni is like a 5-gear car when it comes to democracy. Sometimes he goes quickly and sometimes he goes more slowly, he said. And what the journalists interpreted this to mean was that the donors really weren't going to do anything about this. They were going to keep supporting Museveni, really no matter how he tried to staunch the voices of his own people. There was a theory back then in academic circles and in public policy circles also, that in poor countries like Uganda, democracy and human rights were secondary to the provision of basic needs, such as healthcare, education, economic growth, and so on. Remember, this was just after the Cold War. So there was a lot of triumphalism about how capitalism would solve every problem and usher in a new world of peace and prosperity. That directly promoting democracy was kind of risky and it was unnecessary and it was something only of interest to kind of off-the-wall lefties and so on. And later on, some years after this, an associate of Museveni's even actually told me that the donors were so thrilled with Uganda's economic program and Museveni's embrace of the supposedly free market that they actually hailed him in private as the next Deng Xiaoping of China, the next General Park, the dictator there in South Korea, who's said to have raised the country out of poverty. Of course, the donors were looking the other way as Museveni and his henchmen took increasing control over that economy in Uganda and began looting the treasury as well. We now know that every sub-Saharan African country where it's been tried, dictatorship really, really doesn't work. It leads not only to gross human rights abuses, as we've seen surrounding the recent election and for years and decades before that, again, but it also leads to corruption, which we've also seen the deterioration of public services, and this hype about Africa rising. It keeps these countries at the bottom of the IMF league tables when it comes to poverty. Just a couple of days ago, as has been mentioned by others, Museveni shut down the Democratic Governance Facility, which is a huge donor program. It supported more than a dozen NGOs working to enhance human rights and accountability in the country. They were doing really important work, and this is a disaster in so many respects. It's also a signal that there's no incremental path to democracy and human rights. You can't get there if the overarching structure is totalitarian. And the future of poor African countries like Uganda must stand on a foundation of democracy, with the army way, way, way in the background, not as we see it now, running everything in the service of one family. It would have been easier to foster a culture of democracy in Uganda back in the 1980s and 90s when Museveni was weaker. It's harder now, but it's still possible, of course, if we all work together. And it's really, really heartening to see some of the changes that in policy that my predecessors on this panel, Jeff, Eve, and Moses have described. And so I think we just need to keep working. And so thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I've just been in touch with Ismail. He's trying to get back. I'll just run through to Sarah. Sarah, you've been in the US, like you said, you came over here. Just tell us briefly, what's your take on what you've known to be the policy that countries like the United States is having on to Uganda, and how this is helpful or not to the country, which is your motherland.
Hi, everyone. So I'm happy to be here to be discussing this very important topic with you and the whole world. So my focus is going to be on mainly on what I believe that the US and all these other first world countries that support the democracies, in quotes, the democracies in Africa believe. I think that the issue is what the definition of democracy is to the US and Canada and all these other countries. So we have a constitution in Uganda which says we have to hold elections, and it gives us all these rights in relation to our leaders and our leadership and our democracy, and how we can make sure that we emphasize how the constitution that emphasizes human rights and democracy and all these principles of democracy. But the real question is, does that constitution actually operate? So when the US and all these other foreign countries are giving aid to African countries, all they want to know is, do you have a constitution? Do you hold elections every couple of years? But they don't look deep into what these elections are and how they are being held. Is it an actual election, or is it just an illusion that they need to do because at some point they're going to be held accountable if they don't do it? So when you look at the government in Uganda, for example, we do have elections every 5 years, but it's not because they actually are giving people an opportunity to choose their leaders. They are doing it because if they don't do it, then they won't be able to get all these funds that they want from all these foreign countries. So they are just doing it to fulfill a purpose, but not to actually satisfy the purpose, the needs of the population. So the US and all these foreign countries should always consider, before giving aid to African countries, and Uganda in particular, they should look at the enforcement of the laws. They should look at the election and see how was the election conducted. All these abductions, all these imprisonments, the harassment, a lot of people died during this election. I do not think that it is fair for us to wake up and say there was an election at all. There was no election, so there was no democracy. There was no, people didn't have the power to choose their leaders. So if the US and these other first world countries that offer aid and fund activities in Uganda should look beyond what they are being shown and go deep into, without breaching the principles of sovereign immunity. They should look deep and see what is actually happening on ground and where this money is actually going and what this money is being used for, because it's not fulfilling the purpose that it's supposed to fulfill, but rather it is emphasizing and it is keeping dictatorships in power, which is not fair and which goes against their own principles of democracy, because that's not what it is aimed to do. So my basically my discussion, my point is they should look at they should watch the news and not watch the news that is, because in Uganda, all media houses, almost all of them are biased. They report things that do not give that clear picture of what is happening in the country. So they need to find independent sources of information. Social media is a good source of information. The people themselves are a good source of information. They should look at what is actually happening from other sources and then decide whether or not this money and all these funds and all this aid and the people they are partnering with are fulfilling their purpose. So basically that's my view.
Thank you very much, Salwa. Thank you very much, Moses, for holding the fort while internet happened. We will thank you very much for your gentlemen. We would like to jump into one of the questions that I would like Jeffrey and Helen to speak of in a minute or two. On November 3rd, Americans went to the polls and elected a new president, President Joe Biden, after 4 years of President Trump. The transition was not as smooth as it was expected to be, just like everybody saw it. In your view, do you think this will affect, such an event can affect dictators like Museveni? Jeffrey, please, if you can go first.
Sure. Yeah. Certainly, we all saw the events that took place here, and I think the recent events on U.S. soil are a reminder that American democracy is highly imperfect. It's always a work in progress. It's a work in progress here, as it is a work in progress globally. Here in the U.S., voter suppression is racist, gerrymandering is anti-democratic, violent militias are a danger to public safety. Misinformation, as you heard our previous panelists talking about, is often peddled by authoritarians in power, like Trump himself. It remains rife and it's vile. But simply put, it's a sad but indisputable fact that, as Eve was pointing out, that the U.S. doesn't always live up to its lofty ideals. However, I think it's important to note that despite these glaring problems, America's democratic institutions held, right? The voting process and tallying proved robust enough to prevent fraud and manipulation. American courts, despite Trump-appointed judges, remained independent and largely did their jobs. The media, despite some early missteps, proved up to the task of exposing Trump's repeated lies. The military, importantly, stayed out of politics, while its leadership, including retired generals, spoke out against Trump, the commander-in-chief at the time, positively reaffirming their fidelity to the U.S. Constitution. So I think the democratic resilience that we saw here in the U.S., I think provides some guidance on how the Biden administration can reinvigorate democracy here in the U.S., but also by continuing to unapologetically promote it abroad, including in Africa. I don't take the argument that that given our recent troubles here, that we're not in a position to attempt in good faith to promote fidelity to democratic ideals. I think there are many ways in which we can do this, and I'm happy to go into that. But I think on the broader theme of what we've been discussing, namely on flawed U.S. policy, Helen made a very good point, and Eve too, and others, about how essentially democracy has become secondary in U.S. foreign policy, especially towards Uganda. Uganda is a prime example of how we've actively worked to subdue the democratic aspirations of the Ugandan people, and have essentially subsidized and bankrolled and supported a ruthless dictator. But I think it's important to note, and I think this, in my opinion, this needs to be the fundamental shift in U.S. policy. And this is what I think. So often we see, or the U.S. government under both Democratic and Republican administrations see democracy as secondary, because there's this notion that a developing country like Uganda needs a strongman ruler. That you need a Kagame type, a benevolent dictator who abuses human rights with impunity, but the economy will improve and GDP will go up. However, that's taking an exception and making it the rule. First and foremost, if you look at the data, if you look at the evidence that is available, democracy across the world, including in Africa, has been shown to improve a nation's overall health. And why is this? It's because democratic governments are inherently more open, they're more accountable, they're more transparent, they are protective of media freedom, they don't shut down the internet when they're facing criticism, as was the case with Museveni in Uganda. So this is an enabling environment, right? It allows leaders to be more responsive, it allows them to use that feedback to improve the quality of basic services. Also important here is that democratic nations are more likely to use their own spending on healthcare in the long term, as opposed to relying on outside donors and donor governments. And this benefits all sides involved, obviously. Second, there is strong evidence that democracy leads to stronger economies. This is indisputable. This democratic advantage is also, interestingly, especially pronounced for African countries that have remained democratic for longer periods of time. There's some great studies out there by the Institute of Security Studies in South Africa, for instance, that show this. And more often than not, autocrats like Museveni and other abusive leaders, they fail this test because why? Why is that? They fail to implement needed reforms that will sustain economic growth because they're not held accountable. And because the aid continues to flow regardless from the United States to the tune of nearly $1 billion annually, leaders like Museveni, and I hesitate to call him a leader because he's an autocrat, he's an authoritarian, they rarely have an incentive to act in the public interest. They're doing this for their own personal interest, and we're part of the problem. And by we, I mean the US government. Third, the states that hold free and fair elections, of which Uganda is clearly not an example, and leaders who abide by basic democratic principles, they're inherently less corrupt. The evidence shows this. They're also better positioned to prevent non-state violence, including acts of terrorism. And that takes away, for instance, and Helen can certainly speak to this better than I can, that Museveni likes to position himself as this arbiter of regional stability, when in fact, in Helen's own words, I hate to use your words, Helen, but he's been a pyromaniac in the region for decades now, and this needs to be exposed, and U.S. foreign policy needs to be recalibrated accordingly. So lastly, I'll just say that the evidence is clear. I'm happy to provide links to all these studies. I've written on this rather extensively, that positive development outcomes are dependent on democratic foundations, and this includes free and fair elections. And if we keep denying free and fair elections, as we are in helping to do in Uganda, that's going to continue to exacerbate the problem further. What you have now in Uganda and across Africa, I would argue, is you have a growing chasm that is going to be the problem to watch moving forward. And that chasm is a growing demand amongst the majority youth population for democracy and for democratic rights to be respected, and the supply side, which is lacking. The supply side is lacking, the demand side is growing, and something has to give. That's the inherent tension in Uganda and elsewhere. And that's why I think, given everything I've just said, that the US in particular, as the major donor to Uganda and to other developing nations in the region, that's why we, under the Biden administration, need to fundamentally recalibrate, rethink, and reposition US foreign policy. And I think that can be done, and I hope it will be.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Helen, you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll just take up the rear. That was very articulate and well said, and I thank you very much, Jeff. You know, I just want to say that recent events really made a lot of Americans pretty jittery about democracy in this country, and I think that I remember talking to a kind of opinion leader in New York years ago, really back in 2015, maybe under the sort of peaceful Obama times. And I was talking about a sort of possible book about Uganda, which I eventually wrote, and saying, it's really about democracy and the importance of democracy and so on. She said, oh, nobody really cares about democracy. It's just not, it just wasn't one of those buzzwords that people really rang people's bells. But I think that's definitely changed. And I think people are very, very anxious about democracy at home. And I think that reflects on our view of the world and has made not just ordinary people, but our new administration particularly concerned with it. And so I've been very, very heartened, at least so far. I mean, Biden hasn't had much time to do anything yet, but rhetorically, he and his allies in Congress and in the administration and so on have been very, very good on calling out undemocratic moves all over the world and in Uganda too, which is exciting as anything, considering the silence that's prevailed for so many decades. And I think that there's also a deeper recognition about the way that as just to summarize what Jeff said, that human rights really do, they really are key to everything. Human rights promote entrepreneurialism, creativity in business, and therefore economic growth. And they're the key to good governance and better social services of all kinds. So, so I think in some ways, despite the darkness of the hour, in so many ways, it's a promising and hopeful time. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. And one of the, speaking about elections, Uganda has just come off the backdrop of elections that a lot of people, including Jeff and Helen, have criticized. I want to bring in Moses Walugembe, a former journalist on one of the TV stations who has covered Ugandan elections. I know you have a lot to say about your experience. Could you, in a couple minutes, just tell the viewers why you think the elections in Uganda, first of all, were they free? Were they fair? What's your take on that?
Thank you once again. Now, we've just been discussing, sorry, I'll begin with what we just discussed briefly. Helen and Jeff gave it, they hit the nail on the head about the American election vis-a-vis Uganda's. But Ismail, I think it is incomparable having Ugandan election versus the American system. You can't compare these two at all. Yes, I understand there was an insurrection. I've heard the government spokesperson back in Uganda, and a lot of Museveni's social media activists comparing US, the recent activities at the Capitol Hill, the insurrection and so on, trying to compare it back home. Come on, this is so different. This is completely different. You can't compare the two. You can't even at any point compare the US election to Uganda's election. Not at all. Tell me, you can't even talk about fairness. Where in the world have you seen a presidential candidate campaigning in a bulletproof vest? Where in the world? Only in Uganda. I mean, just even taking through the run-up to where we are. I mean, Ugandans, I can assure you, Ugandans have witnessed the most violent elections. 2011, I covered. 2016, this one I wasn't there, but I watched closely. I was following up everything. This was the most violent election that the country has ever experienced. Don't even talk about the 1980, which we read about. It didn't even come close to this. Yet it is by that election that he went to the bush to kill our grandparents, to kill our parents, and they died. I'm telling you, if this was 1980, I think the youth who are over 80% in Uganda, would be in the bush right now. But all these guys, all these young people have resolved that, hey, we shall not be violent, even when they have been pushed to the wall. But you see, they all said, no, we want to even go to court, which courts we know very well are not independent. So yes, you asked me about fairness. There is no fairness at all. Comparing US election to Ugandan election, not at all. I mean, look at how the army usurped all the powers of the Electoral Commission in Uganda. They completely usurped all the powers of the Electoral Commission. The Special Forces Command was in charge, you know. Failure by the Electoral Commission to carry out their mandated duty. You remember very well from the time of the election. I mean, according to the Presidential Elections Act, I think that is article, I think section 3 of the Presidential Election Act. Yeah, it is section 3 of the Presidential Election Act. It allows presidential candidates to move around the country to consult. There was no coronavirus at all. There was nothing at that time because, I mean, when we went into the election, the major point that was always put forward by the government was that the candidates were not following the SOPs. But before, at the time of consultations, when they were banned, there was no coronavirus at that time. But still, Honorable Chagulanyi and all the other candidates, especially the opposition candidates, of course, Museveni was already moving around the country already. They were not allowed to consult. Now, that is the starting point, because the law in Uganda is different. It says, section 3, that candidates must consult. They have to consult. I mean, even when the Electoral Commission cleared them, still the army usurped the powers. People did not consult. When Honorable Chagulanyi, whenever he tried to follow his program of consultation, it would be blocked, tear gas, people beaten, and all that. Yes.
I would, as a journalist that covered, because I just heard that you covered the 2016 elections, and I know you've got a lot of backlash on social media for your outing your former bosses, NBS TV. As a person who covered 2016, why did NBS TV, why is it getting that much slack for saying, even before the internet is off, why did they come out to say Museveni is the winner? Because you covered 2016 and it's the same thing that happened.
I was coming to that. Excuse me. I was coming to that. So what I was saying is that section 3 allows candidates to consult. That wasn't done at all. Now we come to the way the EC boss conducted, was it the announcement of results. That's what you want. You're asking me about. I mean, definitely he overlooked section 56 of the Presidential Election Act, which of course calls him to declare results as per the returning officer's reports of the declaration forms. This was not availed. I shall not get into it, but we can look at the outer court of it. Justice Byabakama declares results. But when you look at the results, these are the results that the station you're talking about has on their TV station running, you know, and they claim to have a tally center. And all the other tally centers in the whole country, including the participants of the election. I can assure you, people who are trying to compare US election to Uganda's election. I mean, the Democratic National Convention, the Republican National Convention, they have a tally center. I mean, tallying means to add, you know, it is not anything so big and, you know, but being participants, being stakeholders in an election, they were supposed to be allowed to add up elections and then compare, not to announce, but to add up elections, compare. That is definitely at least some fairness of democracy. They were not allowed. Even the civil society organizations that had a tally center at Africana Hotel, it was blocked. They were arrested, released later on, days after the election. So what am I saying? There was no tally sheets that were followed. from the polling stations as per Section 56 of the Presidential Election Act. What they followed, we don't know. These were concocted results, engineered results. Back in 2016, looking there, I remember we were all over the country trying to cover the election. Of course, we expected that having had a software that was able to have a feed of elections and then automatically draw up who is leading and all that. We were so happy going down to the field, to cover this election, only to send poll results from the polling stations. And all these were not fed in. When asked, and of course, when we went to the station, something else was being fed into the system, and of course, relaying completely different results from what we had, So at the end of the day, the same results in 2016, almost the same results that they had at that station are the same results that the Electoral Commission announced, Let's give an example. I mean, let's be just genuine, Ismail. You brought in the issue of comparing US election with a Ugandan election, which is completely different. I still insist. So we have regions.
I want Moses to bring in Yves on this point. I want to hold you right there and bring in Yves. Yves, what's your take? I don't know if you've been really following the elections in Uganda. Probably you have. Given that Uganda is made up of 85% the youth under 25 years of age, and just listening in from Moses how fraudulent the elections are, he has really been getting a lot of slack online. And as a person who has been an insider, we can only believe what he's saying. What do you think that the youth can do post-elections to be able to get the democracy that the country so badly needs? Yes, please.
Well, I mean, I think it's not complicated. It's a little bit dangerous, but people have to mobilize. People have to shut it down. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, Museveni's not going to go without mass protest, mass civil disobedience, mass, social mobilization, and everyone hopes that can happen and can oust him with the least amount of people hurt and killed. But clearly, Museveni is going to, fight to the bitter end, and so I don't think that's complicated. It's throughout history, there's that's what's necessary is the people to take action. There are recent examples of that being successful. That's only one part, though. I think it's also important to not just end it with, okay, Museveni needs to go, but that's central in the moment. But I think we have to think about, when we talk about democracy, we also have to go a little bit further with ownership, economic equality, other elements to more democratic life. But no, I don't have any particular insight beyond saying that people need to mobilize, people need to act. And does Kampala need to be shut down for a month in a general strike for weeks or a month? That's the kind of stuff that needs to happen. And and it's obviously very difficult for those inside Uganda because the regime is very repressive. But it's also important for those outside to be, echoing that energy. People who are living in places that are under less threat, under less danger of repression, need to be, acting in solidarity with those who are mobilizing on the ground.
Thank you very much, Hughes. And speaking about mobilization, there's been a very big social media campaign to deny the Museveni regime from having the MTV Best Africa Awards. I would like, before I bring in Salwa, to ask Jeff to just go to the tail end of what Yves was talking about in terms of mobilization and youth, and what tools could they use now that we know that the regime is intent on killing and abducting and doing all nasty things?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've heard from the panelists today, and as everyone who's watching today knows, it's a very difficult, challenging situation. But a few really quick points, and just to follow up on what Moses was saying, so often when regime apologists and Museveni's cheerleaders and his propagandists on social media and elsewhere like to somehow frame this conversation as the U.S. moralizing or standing on a soapbox and finger wagging, telling Ugandans and Ugandan leadership how to live their lives and how to run their countries. It's not that at all. Uganda has the Ugandan government vis-a-vis Museveni has made agreements with the international community to abide by certain rules, principles, and regulations. These are African conventions. Look at the African Charter on Democracy and Elections as one example that Museveni himself signed back in 1986. I challenge anyone to look at the African Charter on Democracy and Elections and tick one box that was met, one standard that was met in the 2021 elections that just concluded. And I'll wait for that. Secondly, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the ACHPR. Uganda is bound to that as well. Not to mention the International Bill of Rights, which comprises the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. These are agreements that President Museveni, as some refer to him, has made with the world, with the international community. He has agreed to abide by these standards, and that's clearly not the case. So these aren't, this isn't moralizing from the West. This isn't me as an American telling Ugandans what they should think and what they should do. These are agreements and principles that Museveni has bound the country to. And they're based on the virtue of that we're all human beings deserving of human rights and human dignity. I don't see anything controversial about that. And secondly, just to follow up really quickly, for those, Moses was going through the litany of irregularities and allegations of fraud and violations of various election laws and regulations in Uganda. Just yesterday, we hosted a virtual press conference with Bobby Wine and with his U.S. counsel, and we've put together over a 50-page document that outlines in detail all of these allegations. And I'm happy to provide that to anyone who reaches out to me. Perhaps Ishmael, I can send it to you, and you can put it on your platforms. But it goes through very extensively, comprehensively, the number of allegations that have been made, including, just as one example, dozens of tally centers that indicate that Museveni received 100% of the votes. There are dozens of examples of this, which is absolutely farcical. So I would just leave it at that. I know you're running short on time, and I certainly want to give others the opportunity to chime in here.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I would like to bring in Salwa as a lawyer, as an activist. What's your view? How can Ugandans redeem themselves through the legal process? And do we trust the legal process? And before maybe you come in, I'd like to tell the people online, please get in your questions, and I will pick. You can just raise your hand. We'll ask somebody to be just on point, ask your question on point, and we'll just direct you to anybody that you want. That's after Salwa. Salwa, please.
Okay, so one thing I want Ugandans to know, and this is something that a lot of people don't know or are not sure about, but one thing I want Ugandans to know, and especially the youth who are tired of the current regime and the current situation, the law protects you. The law on paper at least protects you. That's a good starting point. If someone, a police officer, if you're moving, a police officer arrests you, a police officer beats you, you have remedies. There is a recourse. There is penalties for their actions. There is something you can do about it. And a lot of people, when I was coming for this live, someone told me, you can't do that because it's risky. they are abducting people in Uganda. And then I say, let them try me. Let them try my family. I know what we have to do. I know that there is a legal system. There are laws on paper. We have domestic laws. We don't even have to go into the international laws, but our local laws protect us. Ugandans, you have the power and you have the laws that were enacted to protect you. Now, the question is, do they actually protect us? That's debatable. Because of the entanglement, there is no separation of power in Uganda. Technically, it's not there because the executive controls everything. The president, not even the executive, the president himself, President Yoweri Museveni, controls everything in that country. He decides what the judiciary is and what the judiciary does. He decides what the legislature does. So we have that problem, but I don't want Ugandans to lose hope. I want Ugandans to know that we can force them to actually abide by the law through activism and through going to court and talking and asking, demanding for them to obey our laws and enforce them. So we shouldn't lose hope. We have to just keep talking and we have to keep pushing them, because right now, you see, during the election last, and speaking to people who are in these poor communities, because we talk too much on social media, and the opposition talk too much about, you've forgotten about the poor people, you only care about the people who are rich and who have money. And then he started waking up. He said, okay, I need to go to them. And he went there. Of course, his motives were only timely because he needed their support for the election, but at least they realized that we have the power. And recently, one of the ministers who lost an election admitted and said, I think that we have overstayed in power. I think that people are tired. That's why we lost the election. And so you see how they realize it's not that they don't know that what they are doing is wrong, and that they just take advantage when we are keeping quiet. So let us talk more, let us become more engaged, and let us advocate for our rights. Civil society, I call upon the civil society to please help people who can't afford legal services when they get in a situation where they need to go to court. I call upon civil society to be able to provide them with the help that they need and give them legal aid so that they can enforce their rights in the courts. And the thing about the court is, they might be biased when it comes to some cases that are too political and big cases, but when it comes to minor cases where a police officer arrests you without any reason, when it comes to a case where you're moving and you're assaulted by a police officer, the law is clear. There is no way a judge is going to twist it to favor the other party over you, who is a victim. So people should learn, and people should actually advocate for their rights and go to courts of law and utilize the legal system that was enacted and the laws that were enacted to protect them. That is a very good starting point. Because once you know something, it's hard for someone to violate your rights, because you know what you're entitled to and you know how you can enforce them. So it's hard for the violations to keep coming. And that's one thing I love about the current opposition, because it tells the people you have the power. And once people know that they have the power, it will be hard for it to be taken away from them. So legally, I think that our laws are good. They are almost as good as the American laws. The problem is with the enforcement. But again, we can't have our laws enforced unless we demand for it. So let us keep talking, let us keep engaging them, and let us keep advocating. We can do it, like you say, we can do it by defiance, we can do it by talking, being active, we can do it by being aggressive. We don't have to riot, we don't have to fight, but we need to do more, because as we have seen, just sitting back doesn't work. And being simple and easy on them also doesn't work. So we need to be we need to do things differently. But,
thank you very much, Salwa. I see Jeff and Moses unmuted. I don't know if you want to jump in for a minute before we open up the lines. Who wants to? Jeff, you want to go first on that, and then Moses?
I was just going to say something really quickly. I think Salwa is making some really great points, but also I know there's a lot of folks watching today that live in the U.S. and in the broader Ugandan diaspora, and there's an incredibly important role for you all to play too. The notion of solidarity, and I think Ishmael, you brought this up. The campaign against having the MTV Africa Music Awards being held in Uganda, I think, was a great testament to that. You saw Ugandans in the country, in the region, in the diaspora, all building this collective voice behind this campaign, why it was unacceptable. And just speaking from my own personal experience really quickly, the Gambia was a country I worked very closely on for a number of years, and it was mainly with engaging with Gambian diaspora leaders, those who are living in exile. And if it wasn't for their leadership, and if it wasn't for their perseverance, their resilience, their passion, them contacting their local legislators, which is incredibly important, Yahya Jammeh would still be in power today, 100% full stop, if it wasn't for the role of the Gambian diaspora. So Ugandans in the diaspora, those who are listening today, have an incredibly crucial role to play. First and foremost, as I mentioned, contacting your local congressman or congresswoman, asking them why they're not speaking out on the abuses being committed in Uganda with US taxpayer money. That's incredibly important. Going and literally knocking on their doors, perhaps after the pandemic period has passed. But then secondly, really, really important, dictators like Museveni grow strength in the darkness, right? They become more emboldened in the shadows. And the more we shine a spotlight on the situation, the more that those leaders know that the world is paying attention, that the world is watching, they're going to be less apt to commit brazen acts with impunity, right? And that's where the diaspora comes in again. It's through programs like this. It's through online radio stations. It's through having protests outside of the U.S. Capitol. I just can't stress this enough. The role of diaspora leaders and the role that you can play here is so incredibly important. And I know I've already linked some of you all and some of you who might be listening with some of the Gambian diaspora leaders to engage on lessons learned and what they learned in the lead up to that country's December 2016 election, which ultimately ousted Yahya Jammeh, who had been in power for 23 years. So there's a lot of lessons learned to be shared there. And I'm happy to continue to make those connections offline. So if anyone is interested, please don't hesitate to reach out on that.
Thank you very much. And before Moses comes in, I see the number of people, Jeff, requesting for the document. Sophie Newman is online. Sophie Newman is also a journalist. And a couple of other people, Judy, Charlene. So I probably you share that with me, and I'll share it on some of my platforms and maybe by email. If you need a copy of the document, please just write your email in the chat box, and we'll just email it to you. Moses, 1 minute, and then we can go to the lines, please.
Okay. Okay, 1 minute, like you said. I'll begin with a comment from, I think, one of the persons on the panel. I think the comments, I just read one comment which touched me about how local media, they ask, how can local media in Uganda hold leaders accountable? Now, this is the thing. I want to join this together with what Jeffrey just said, the role of the diaspora. I think the role of the diaspora should basically have been the role of the local media in Uganda, pointing out the social ills, pointing out things that are happening behind the curtains, because most journalists know them. However, I must say, and on support of my fellow colleagues back in Uganda, I must say that sometimes their hands are tied. I mean, I worked in a government media. I worked in the private media, and I can assure you, all of them are the same. All their hands are tied. There's a lot of censorship. There's a lot of censorship, intimidation by the army, the security forces. I think the problem that the country has right now is the security forces. I think Museveni's only strength right now is that gun, the special forces. These are the guys who go out. They are the ones kidnapping people right now. I can attest to this. They are kidnapping people. They have kidnapped a lot of opposition agents from even the day of election. They are the ones who are used to ballot staff. Some of them are dressed in police uniform. And then you talked about the engagement of civic involvement. That was Yves. Yes, civic involvement would come in, but you see, the challenge is that going by the big numbers of the people that Yoweri Museveni has murdered, has killed, I can assure you, for him, killing is easy. I mean, go on the streets, he will fire at you. I personally watched. I'm still looking for that video in my archives. I have it. I watched in the Buganda riots when a big, we call them mambas back home in Uganda, a big mamba of soldiers drove in a whole line of people in the middle of masses of people who were at Mengo. And guess what? If people did not move like water, this truck was gonna crush all of them. Now, my challenge is to America, to USA. These people are the ones who have made Museveni who he is. They have empowered his military. They have actually empowered the special forces. That command over there is doing a lot of atrocities. You hear of the drones that are kidnapping people, through which people are being kidnapped. My friend, these drones are operated by people from SFC. They are the ones who kill. You heard about the boxer who was shot down. Until today, the president has it. I'm told he received an investigation of how Zebra was killed. But until today, he can't come out. Yet he admitted. I'm sure he probably must have had some dementia admitting that the army, because I just wondered how he even admitted that his own soldiers had killed this guy, you know. But now that he admitted, probably in knowing or by not knowing, it means that it has gone over beyond. So my worry is, where is this the people who empowered him? Where is the European the European Union? Where are they? You know, don't talk about the African Union. This is the same monkeys who are fighting about, I mean, about their own protection of their own forest. But I think, like Jeffrey said, the diaspora has a big role to play. The diaspora is the bush right now for Uganda, you know, and I think we must put pressure on our senators. We must put pressure on our area, because I've known the American system to work. I think the legislature has powers. The institution of the legislature is really, really strong, especially in forming the foreign policy. And Uganda being a friend of America, I mean, Uganda has fought wars for America. And the challenge is, it has turned out to be a business between Museveni and these countries. Now, that's where the challenge is. It doesn't mean that if any other leader took over Uganda, America won't be a friend of Uganda. And it doesn't mean that our capabilities of Ugandan military soldiers will go out for them to be able to fight the wars and pacify the region like America wants. No, I think the most important thing right now is to focus on Uganda as a country, not Museveni as a person, especially when these countries are dealing with Uganda as a country in all their operations. So how then do we overcome the military dictatorship? Now, this should be the question. This should be the reasons. I mean, they have tried elections. They have tried courts. I mean, Uganda has a court system. Uganda has a parliamentary system. They apparently, you heard that most central areas, members of parliament were not voted back. You know, yes, it is because the central region is so gripped. People there are so vigilant. But the other areas, still, Museveni has like 310 members of parliament, and he will tell you that he won those areas. But I can assure you, this is the way the dictatorship works. You know, they make sure they have a bigger number of members of parliament, because any law that they bring, these people will just pass it, you know, because of the numbers. And you know that the numbers rule, and that is the democracy in quotes. So even when we have a lively press, even when we have a parliament, even when we have all those pyramidal elected members of NUP like you had, still, this man he yields a lot of power at a certain level. He has the DSOs, he has the RDCs. These all work covertly. Of recent, he just appointed many more. So it's a whole big thing that we must fight. But fighting this requires, I think, the diaspora to come so much strong. We must alert our senators. We must make their phone calls so busy as never before, before they come up to form any other foreign policy with Uganda.
Thank you very much, Moses. I would like to open up the lines. Please just state your name and where you're based, uh, and just ask your question directly to whoever you want to. So I have somebody who is a NUP from Bahrain.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sowunjoji. My question goes to Walugembe Moses, the former NBS TV journalist. You made a post stating how the NBS TV does its fraud and feeding on results. So you said you were in the field and you guys had the software. So when you reached the station, what was the situation there that made them change, and how did it take you? How did it make you feel about your country when you also that you went to the field, you ran into the muds and fed in the results, but things turned out to be different. So I want us to understand and compare for us the experience you had and what you think took place of recent with the station where they deny the allegations that you posted on your Facebook page. Thank you so much.
Moses, before you come in, I'll take a couple of hands so you can just write the question down. I will go to Ronald Nabimara, if you're ready. Ronald? Okay, Ronald is not here. Omar? I see Ronald is.
Yes, yeah, I'm back. Yeah, thanks, Tim. And in a few minutes, I want to say
in 1 minute, please.
But one quick question. Yeah, one quick question I want to ask is, we are talking about Uganda being and General Museveni being a signatory to East African, African, and international conventions. I wish we can discuss what we have to do different since the 2011 elections, because we are many stakeholders and every election.
I think we lost. Are you back, Ronald?
Yeah, I'm back. Okay. I was just muted.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So I was saying that yes, we understand Uganda is signatory to East African and African international conventions. That's what I was saying. But then every post-election since 2011, we have such discussions where stakeholders, including media and development partners, coming to have all these discussions around the table. But if we would want to concentrate on the outcome of our discussions post-election since then, what are we doing different to really create a change that will define the political environment smart, looking forward as a youthful generation where we are saying that over 8+% of the Ugandans are below 25. So we need to define the things. Otherwise, we can keep lamenting and etc. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go to Julius Kakoza. Julius Kakoza.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, all the panelists. So I just have a follow-up question for Moses and also to the other journalists on here. So Moses, I know you've worked so much in the industry in the Ugandan media industry, but why is it that the Ugandan media doesn't have a lot of independent journalism? Because I mean, the media plays a lot in overcoming dictatorship and holding leaders accountable. So why is it that we don't have a lot of independent journalism out there? Even you yourself as a journalist, why is it that a lot of media companies, media personalities in Uganda don't come out to act independently so as to because a lot of them are afraid, but then why don't a lot of them come out to act independently?
Okay.
Then my other question goes to Helen. and Jeff. Why is it that a lot of international media focus more on showing us on what's going on down there in probably like around Uganda, other than also focusing on the powers out here that are supporting what's going on down there? For example, the USA itself, it's having a lot of support given to Museveni. However, you're not pushing too much towards America itself that is supporting the dictatorship. So how can the international media also put pressure on their own people that are using taxpayers' money to to oppress people out there in Uganda? Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll take one last one for this round from Sophie. Sophie Newman, please, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, it's Sophie Navagerika. Sorry.
Sophie Navagerika.
Yeah, hi. My question goes to Jeff or Helen. Having watched Joe Biden yesterday address the State Department and promising to align his foreign policy with the domestic policy and all that, do you have any hope for Uganda being part of the conversation anytime soon? Because I live in the United Kingdom and we don't seem to be having anything going on at the moment because they're using COVID as an excuse. We can't even go to protest at all. Any idea if the US is gonna be moving, if they're gonna put us into consideration, and if the ICC is gonna look at our cases at all? If you have any of that, if you can give me any light on that, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, and sorry, Sophie Navagerika. Thank you. Helen, Jeff, and then Moses, please. Helen, you're on mute.
Well, we really are working very hard to try to get the Biden administration to take Uganda seriously. But as Moses emphasized, what the administration does really depends upon what lawmakers, elected officials, such as senators and congressmen and women, urge the government to do, really. And that's where our democracy comes in, which is where, we still do have one here, and it still does more or less function. It's a little rickety in places, but it still works. And so I really, really want to emphasize very much that point, that if you live anywhere in the United States, or if you live in the UK like Sophie and have friends in the United States, you must urge them to contact their senators or congressmen, both senators and congresspersons, to support, for example, the resubmission of the resolution that was drafted by Senator Menendez of New Jersey, for example, which is calling for a rethink of US policy towards Uganda, including consideration of sanctions against the regime itself and individuals, and a rethinking of aid to the country. So I think, the best way to do that is, if you don't know who your senators and congresspeople are, Google that to get the information. You can easily get their phone numbers and email addresses from their websites and ring them up and really just keep the phones ringing. You can call more than once. You can email more than once. You can do it every day if you want to. And that's really, it really, really, really makes a difference. And it's numbers that matter. You don't have to worry too much about what you say. Just simply state your opposition to the human rights abuses in Uganda right now, and your concern about U.S. support, in particular to Museveni's regime. So I think, I hope that because really the Biden administration is sort of new. They're introducing this idea for the first time that they're going to actually support human rights and democracy, which isn't really something that's been emphasized by previous leaders, Democrat and Republican. They also need encouragement. They need to know that the people of this country also support that and really care about it, and that will encourage them. So there is some channel of communication for everyone, no matter who you are. even people who may be undocumented, or you can also call. It doesn't matter. All you have to do is say where you are, what your zip code is, and that's it. So please do it.
Thank you very much, Helen. Jeffrey, you wanna?
Yeah, I don't have much additional to add to that. I fully endorse and agree 100% with what Helen just said. And again, that comes back to the role of you all in the diaspora who are listening today. Call your local representatives. They're not going to act unless they hear from you. You have to bang on their doors, literally. You have to call them. You have to get your friends to call them. And one recent really good example of this, the power, I spoke of the power of the Gambian diaspora and their hugely influential role in what happened there in their last elections. Another good example is, we've been working through Vanguard Africa very closely with leaders in the Cameroonian diaspora. And most recently, there's been a bipartisan resolution in Congress that will likely be passed into law soon that will fundamentally shift U.S. policy towards Cameroon. Cameroon is a country, as many of you will know, is located in Central Africa. They've had the same president since 1985. And in many ways, it's a very similar context to Uganda, where you have a regime living off of and maintaining its power through the largesse of support from the U.S. government. But due to the activism of the Cameroonian diaspora, of them going to their congresspersons' doors, knocking on them, calling them relentlessly, I can personally attest to that, relentlessly over 2 years, that's what's going to shift U.S. policy. They have to hear directly from you. It's one thing for folks like Helen and I to be sort of vehicles to or a platform with which to bring your concerns to our U.S. Representatives, but it means so much more when they hear directly from you. And I know it sounds so mundane and so simple, and it is very time consuming. But you have to do that. That's where it starts, and they're not going to act unless they hear from you. Africa features very, very, very exceedingly low on the U.S. foreign policy agenda. So it's up to folks like you, but also folks like Helen and I and others standing in solidarity with you. We're all in this together, but they have to hear from you. I know I've put an emphasis on that, but it's so crucially important. And I'm happy to talk with folks offline about how you can do that, how we can mobilize solidarity, mobilize collective voices, who you should be reaching out to, who is the most influential elected representatives to be speaking to, because there is a constituency out there. I know, it was talked about at the beginning of this panel that, the U.S. doesn't care about democracy. I fundamentally disagree. I think I'm very, very critical of U.S. foreign policy, including towards Uganda, but the U.S. government is not monolithic. You have incredibly impassioned human rights defenders who are members of Congress, who are members of the Senate. My local congressman, for instance, Jamie Raskin, is one of the leading human rights voices in the country. And he's been incredibly helpful on issues relating to Cameroon specifically. We've met with him, with Bobby Wine when we've had him here in Washington. So there are people out there who are your allies. And if you need help identifying them, I'm happy to help with that. And then secondly, really quickly, I know, I think it was Julius had a question about the lack of criticism or perhaps media coverage of the U.S. I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly, but I think certainly, we have to be, as an American, as a white American male, we certainly have to be humble in our approach, and especially everything that's happened in the U.S. over the past 4 years, and going beyond that, we have to engage in our foreign policy with humility. But what does that mean? It means engaging with partners, whether it's Uganda or elsewhere, as equal partners, and demanding that they live up to their own obligations. And that goes back to what I was talking about before, about these international agreements and obligations that Museveni and others have signed up for, and in often cases ratified. By not doing so, and by not calling out fraudulent elections as what just happened in Uganda, we're not treating Ugandans with respect. We're treating them as second-class citizens. And how you treat them as equals is when you call out the abuses that are happening, the repression that is ongoing, and the sham, farcical, fraudulent election that just happened. That's treating them with respect. That's treating them with humility. And that's what I think our elected leaders in the U.S. government in general has to do. And we haven't been doing that. So it's up to all of us to force them to do so.
Thank you very much, Jeff. For the viewers and everybody who is online right now, just know that this conversation is going to go online. We'll continue the conversation online on the different platforms that we have. I'll allow Moses to use a minute to, I know his minute is a minute, to try and summarize the question that were asked, and then we'll have a round of the last remarks to be able to close the discussion. Moses, please. Thank you,
Thank you very much. I'll try to summarize. Thank you, Jeff, for that really expounded view. How I felt about relaying fake results, someone asked. Of course, the other person asked why is it that we don't have a lot of independence in Ugandan journalism, which could be the solution to the problems that we have? Well, a little bit. I'll put both together in my explanation because of the 1 minute. So definitely any other journalist who is out there to practice this kind profession, which has principles, which is based on ethics and codes of ethics, would want to have his results or poll results aired as is on any media station. Now that doesn't happen in Uganda. It just once in a while, you know. Let me just draw back on just the recently concluded elections in 2021. I watched various stations, NBS, NTV. I was here trying to watch all of them, the way they laid down the results. NTV had reporters who were right down in the field, and they were making calls, and they were saying, I'm in such and such a station where they had 580 polling, 580 voters, but after the total counting results, we had 590 or 500 or 600, which means there was an increased number of ballot papers that were counted, and definitely such areas the NRM won. You know, that means there was ballot stuffing. You know, so that is the kind of reporting that actually would have been able to help in such an election. That is on various media houses, but media houses like NBS, they will come up with a software, like I told you, like someone asked about that. Now this software is really good, very simple to manage. You know, you have all you need is people right down there in the field to send in poll results from the various polling stations. You know, and then you add up on a system. Just type in the numbers. Hey, my name is Moses. I'm in Rukunjiri. The polling station I'm having at here, or whatever it is, has 47 for Bobby Wine, 10 for Museveni, 2 for whoever and the other candidates, and you just put in those numbers. As easy as that. But the question is, why don't they do it? It turns back to the media house, the patronage in Uganda. Most media houses, why you see journalists are good, they are smart, they know how to write, they have trained, but they can't operate. Once you are independent, you either turn out to be an Andrew Mwenda, or you probably find yourself pushed out of the country. You know why? Because there's a lot of patronage by the media owners. First of all, most of the media owners in Uganda, unlike, for instance, the Nation Media, which is based in Kenya, which probably still holds on its journalism principles, the other media houses that are born in Uganda are of people who have a background, having worked with either State House, having worked with the regime. You know, they're all in bed with the regime. Now you come, you want to exercise your independence journalism, where you'll either be fired, you know, you have no protection of yourself, because otherwise they will surrender you. You know, you'll be naked. So who wants to die? Who wants to die because they are, I mean, there's no story that is bigger than your life. So you find there's a lot of self-censorship. You know, there will be threats when you, for instance, air out an investigative piece. A time ago, I think last year, one of our colleagues, you saw very well, the whole world watched when one journalist did a report on BBC about how drugs are stolen. He ended up being looked for so badly, you know. He ended up being looked for so bad, and he's just one in among many. Many others go always in hiding. So the issue is, journalists are a central target. You cannot say they are not doing their job. They are trying as much as they can. They are beaten. You saw journalists recently who was hit on the head. He's still in hospital. You know, they're always beaten. They're always a central target. You know, they are seen as spies against the government, which is not supposed to be. The journalism is supposed to be a fourth estate. They're supposed to work to relay things to the community. Our role is to help the community have their views aired so that the government can pick them up and probably work on them. In any true country, in a country like America, that's what happens. You go to the Chris Cuomo show on CNN, you listen, he breaks it down, openly speaks it out. That's how it is supposed to be. But in Uganda, that's not possible at all. The other thing is that they keep people in fear. I'm finished. I'm concluding. So they keep people in fear. They keep the media in fear by way of closing media houses. 2009. I'll give an example of CBS. When there were riots, CBS was giving live broadcast of what was going on, the Buganda riots and everything. It was closed. It was closed. So anytime a media house comes out openly, they try to be independent. The Uganda Communications Commission will quickly rise up and say, hey, you did broadcast ABC, and not even limited to just the things that are political, but even the other things, the rights of people, the rights of, for instance, LGBT, the rights of, I mean, there is a lot of things that the world will not be let to know. The world will not be, I mean, the country will not let out through the media. That's why at the end of the day, there is always self-censorship. Self-censorship comes in because of all that. So that's why my friend who asked, why don't journalists have a lot of independence? There's a lot of things. That's why now you see that even the social media, they're trying to kind of get hold of it. They are, of course, threatening people not to distribute media reports that they have, things that they have seen, claiming that we shall be able to see you. Of course, we all know that they cannot see what we share on WhatsApp. They can't. Neither can they even get hold of the calls that we make on WhatsApp because they don't have that capacity. They are end-to-end encrypted. But what they do is they provide a fear, instill a fear within the public, so the public will not speak out. The public will keep quiet. So my friends out there in Uganda, please, the social media bloggers are doing a good job. They have been able to, let out all the information. I mean, we would not have known what happened on Bobby Wine election campaign trail, all those kind of intimidations, the violence that was exhibited by the army, by the police. I mean, because, at the end of the day, this wasn't on the national TVs. It was always on the social media. So we probably need to use the social media more than before. The good thing, our people have now known how to use the VPN. So they probably need to get hold of that. Now, as the diaspora does their job, we call the senators and everyone, and as America probably will be lined up to change their policy towards Uganda in a way of holding on to the foreign exchange, the military aid that they're providing to build a military dictatorship. I'm sure at some point, he can't get away with it. Probably every man has, I'm sure every man in the world has a weak point. However much strong you are, there will always be a weak point, and eventually we shall have the country back to a normal democratic process.
Thank you very much, Moses. And as we wrap up, I'd like to say that I live in an optimistic world. I watched in disbelief on January 6th when these guys went into the Capitol. And I was also happy when on the same day at about midnight going into 2 o'clock, listening to the screams from my neighbors whenever a senator said yes to certifying the election of Biden. And to that point, as we wrap up, ladies and gentlemen, what would you want to tell the opposition people in Uganda, the youth in Uganda, and probably Honorable Bobby Wine, if he's watching this, what would you tell him in regards to what we're talking about? In 2 minutes, if we can. Mr. Yevs, please.
Well, my message would be simple. It would be a message of mobilize, mobilize, mobilize. I mean, if you want to get rid of a dictator, you're gonna have to fight, and ideally in a form that's non-violent but firm but disruptive. So the message is mobilize. But I think be incredibly skeptical of the U.S. and Canada. This is while there are you have friends in the world, you don't. I don't believe you have friends in the governments of the major capitalist countries. So I think that the project is, the immediate project is to have Museveni go, but there's also a broader political project of developing an economy and politics that is more robust and not dependent on you know, foreign countries, and it's more African centric and Ugandan centric. That's also part of the should be part of the broader political battle. But in the short term, if you want Museveni to go, it's going to have to be you know, huge mobilization, and it's going to have to be disruptive. And for those of us who are not on the front line, we can do what we can to pressure our governments to not further entrench Museveni's power.
Thank you very much, James. I'll go to Salwa and then Jeff and then lastly Helen. Salwa, please.
So for me, my advice to Ugandans and the opposition in particular is that the struggle has just started. We shouldn't stop. We should keep pushing. In terms of relying on the foreign countries for assistance, that's okay. We can do it and they can help us. But also we have to understand that as long as something does not adversely affect the US or Canada or China and all these other foreign countries, they'll most likely not care very much because it does not adversely affect them. So we have to fight. The effort, 90% of it has to come from us. We can engage them. We can take lessons from them. We can seek help from them, but we should be at the front line of this struggle and we should not stop. We should keep pushing because the more we push, the more our leaders are going to back down, and then eventually we're going to have power. I strongly believe that these are the last 5 years of President Museveni. I do not think there is any way he's going to come back in 5 years or that his government is going to come back in 5 years. If it does, through the way it has been doing, we believe that's going to be the end of it all because we know what we are entitled to and we are not willing to settle for less anymore, and we shouldn't. So that's just it. There is no more sitting on a round table to talk about things. We are actually bringing what we want. We either get what we want or we don't want anything they are offering us anymore. So that's it. And we should just keep our ideas open. We should keep our minds open. We should keep talking. We should speak up, utilize social media a lot, use your phones. Even when they try to block us, we should find alternative means of having our voices heard, and all of us as a whole. And I thank you, Jeffrey. I thank you, Ms. Ellen, and I thank you, Mr. Hughes, Moses. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. And I appreciate, and we all appreciate the care and the help. Basically, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Salwa. And of course, she speaks with a lot of love from a lot of Ugandans that have been shown towards Jeffrey, and a lot of slack that has gone towards Jeffrey, and a lot of love that has gone to Helen for being a champion for human rights in Uganda, not only in Uganda and in Africa at large. Jeffrey, what would you tell a Ugandan opposition leader, candidate, youth that is watching this right now as you wrap up?
Yeah, I think a lot has already been said. I definitely would agree and just, pull on the thread that Salwa was eloquently talking about. It's Ugandans who are going to lead this fight. Those on the ground, those in the diaspora. You are the change makers. You are at the vanguard of this fight. But also importantly, I would end by saying that solidarity knows no boundaries, and it certainly knows no borders. You have allies the world, I think, is watching now more than at any point in recent Ugandan history. You have allies here, you have allies around the world, and don't hesitate to reach out. No one human is an island, right? We all share the same common humanity, and due to your creative struggle, your persistence, your quite honestly your bravery has endeared you to pro-democracy advocates and human rights champions the world over, certainly here in Washington, D.C. And I can certainly say for a fact that you have allies in the U.S. Congress right now, you have allies in the U.S. Senate, you have allies in the Biden administration at the highest levels. So keep fighting the good fight, and we'll keep standing with you and doing what we can to support.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Helen, please.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'll just be very brief. I mean, if the message to Bobby Wine and the people around him, I think you're doing an amazing job. And I just am incredibly impressed by all of you. And I also feel also that you must keep working to unite both the opposition within the country, much of which is coming together around the movement right now. Kizza Besigye, for example, who has been sort of standing aside as the elder statesman of liberation in the country, really is, and democracy is behind you and with you at the moment too. And so is Patrick Amuriat, and I think the other opposition leaders too will shortly be coming on board. Yeah, so keep working. Really, the key now is unity within Uganda and also around the world. So keep up the good work.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you very much, Salwa. Thank you very much, Moses. Thank you very much, Yves from Montreal. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. With that, we'd like to thank everybody who has tuned in right now. I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the African Integration Forum to thank Jeffrey, Yves, Moses, Helen, and Salwa for taking time to talk about this issue, take these minutes away from your very busy work schedules, and also to say that Ugandans see you, they appreciate the work that you do for the efforts for change and for human rights. And they really, really appreciate. There's nothing, apart from Jeffrey, who has already gotten a Ugandan name, there's nothing that we can actually give you for now. But we really, really appreciate you, and thank you so much. For those who are out there, the conversation will continue online on the different social media platforms. We'll probably take it up on Jeff's Twitter platform. We can go, please take your questions right there. We'll have the discussion going on in the evening and the night. And would like to say thank you, good afternoon, and goodbye. May God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Thanks, everyone.